Sae'Von Springer is the owner and founder of Native Assets. Any views expressed by Sae'Von or his guest are their own thoughts and opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Native Assets or the guest's respective employer. Any guest appearance by representatives of Web3, NFT, crypto, or any other kind of organization does not constitute an endorsement by Native Assets or the guest's respective employer. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be mistaken as financial advice. Always conduct your own due diligence and consult a qualified professional when considering any investments of any kind. Today's conversation I'm particularly hype about because in general, it's really easy in tech to get really focused and really hype on the technology itself. Oh, this cool thing here, this cool use case here. But at the end of the day, the best tech in the world doesn't really matter if you don't effectively bring it to market, if you don't effectively explain the use case and the application of that technology. And today's guest, he has no shortage of experience doing just that. Working with tech companies, working with products, and saying, all right, how are we exactly going to bring this to market? How are we going to drive growth? And how are we going to do that in an organic way, which is a key element. All right. So joining us today, one of the founding members at Thirdweb, Catty Berragan. How are you?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here. I appreciate you having me.
No, absolutely, man. We met each other on a work call, and
We did.
And then I got a little bit more context on your background. I'm like, yo, this is right up the alley for exactly what we try to deliver on the show, and I think that people just like yourself are a wealth of knowledge and also are in high demand and short supply. So if we can duplicate a little bit of what you know for the audience, I think that'll have people well served. So thank you for making the time to join. If you could just set people up, give them a little bit of context. You've done a lot of things. You've done creative directing. Actually, your bio on LinkedIn, I like how you mentioned you scale Web3 and tech companies. You specialize in joining the dots of changing internet culture, combining creativity, production, innovative technology, and knowledge of social media to produce industry-leading campaigns for brands such as Twitch, Uber, Hinge, Brita, Puma, TikTok Music, TikTok Creators, Comedy Central, Boohoo, and the BBC. Just so folks know who they're hearing on the other side of this mic, man. So if you could give people a little more context on all of that.
Well, I didn't think that'd ever get read back to me. It's so my background's quite interesting. I actually found my way into marketing, making meme pages, which is a kind of non-traditional route. And I basically dropped out of university, never really kind of studied professionally, but found myself building kind of social media pages at a very early age. And that gave me like a very kind of unique understanding of the way social media works and how to build audiences online, essentially. And that caught the attention of a guy called Stephen Bartlett, who was the founder of a company called SocialChain. And he brought me on as, I think, third or fourth employee to start building what was essentially a social media agency. And we went on to run the kind of social strategies for big tech companies, people like Uber and Uber Eats. We worked with TikTok to run their social media pages as well. And we were really seen as the kind of experts in organic social, so how to create content that, obviously communicated the vision of the brand, but also we understood deeply how each social platform worked and what were the nuances behind the content you created that would make the content travel further and, get you disproportionate reach for the kind of investment you put into creating that content. And so spent a few years out in New York building some of the social media pages for these big tech brands. And in the last 12 months or so, Stephen left the business about a year and a half ago, and I left at roughly the same time. We turned our attention to Web3. And we kind of, my goal was always to take everything I learned kind of doing that, running those social media pages to kind of tackle a bigger problem. How do I take what I've learned and apply that to, one singular challenge? And Web3 was really what caught my attention. I became kind of obsessed with the space, with the creativity, with this kind of new way of structuring the internet and all of the kind of unlocks that came with that. And we found ourselves building Thirdweb. And a huge part of the work we've been doing in the last 12 months is how do we create content for the Web3 industry that kind of communicates the incredible stories that are being told in the space, but also helps people understand what the technology unlocks. And, that is in parallel to what our platform does. It kind of enables people to build Web3, enables people to build Web3 applications. And likewise, we're trying to create content and grow our brand in a way that is educating and onboarding people onto Web3. And so, yeah, I've just been someone who's created content online my whole life. Well, my whole adult life. Starting off like, I was making like YouTube videos when I was 13. It's just been like a kind of obsession of mine. And so, yeah, my whole career has just been a kind of steady, I guess, amalgamation of all those learnings. And yeah, I think this is the most exciting thing I've ever worked on. So yeah, been an interesting 12 months.
Oh man, I bet that's an understatement. So when you make that transition, right? Because I want to span the gamut, because obviously what you've done and what you've learned working with these prior tech companies is going to inform what you're doing now, even though the product of itself, it's almost like what you were building at SocialChain, like you're now bringing that internally to a company that is very infrastructure focused, very tool focused. So the demo is slightly different, but the practices of what you're putting in place still hold true. So before we get more, I guess, focused on the Web3 angle of things, after spending all that time at SocialChain, working with some of the biggest tech companies in the world, the tech companies that were getting most of the attention before Web3 even was a term being thrown around, what would you say were your main takeaways working at these places when it comes to understanding the power, one, of using social channels, and then two, how to do this in an organic way that also drives the business needs of your clients?
Yeah, it's a great point because it is a very, very different audience we're marketing to now. And, we're essentially, our biggest audience is developers, right? And that's very different to creating social content for someone like Uber and Uber Eats, where it's very closely, consumers. It's a very different kind of way of speaking. But I realized pretty quickly that the fundamental practices were essentially the same. And social media was always going to be our most powerful and our biggest bet, because it's how you can reach people without having to pay. There's no additional investment required to reach an audience that you build yourself. And if you understand how to speak to them, you have this megaphone at your disposal that, when we have a new feature or when we have a new product we want to launch, it's so important to have an audience that you can reach to deliver that product to. And what we've learned over the years is that social media channels are very algorithmically driven. They are kind of, you have to be obsessed with the way the algorithm changes in order to keep up. And there's a few points there to think about. So the first is simply how you create the content, so understanding, how a video should be shot, how you the dimensions of the video, whether you use audio or not, the kind of more tactical elements of it. But there's also a wider point that people don't realize, that even if you build like a huge audience, if you build an audience of 100, 200,000 people, and then you start to create content which they don't engage with. So if you start to create poor content, you post a lot of links, you post ads, these social media platforms will lower your ranking in the algorithm. And the minute you post something, they just won't show it to your audience, because you have taught the algorithm that you don't create content that they want to see. And social platforms are driven solely to keep people on the platform. And so you can do irreversible damage to your brand by creating bad content. And so we have a very strict philosophy that, we will only ever create good content and build an audience the right way. And that means that, we have a goal of having 100,000 YouTube subscribers or having 100,000 Twitter followers that we can reach at the click of a button. And that's no additional investment. We're not having to go to a creator to pay them extra. We can do it all internally, all in-house, and reach them immediately. And so that stays the same across any industry and across any brand. We are definitely marketing to a different audience, and it's arguably B2B, some of it as well, like how we're reaching those kind of decision makers in companies. But the fundamentals are the same. If you create good content, you tell good stories, then people will want to engage with you, and they'll want to, understand what you bring to the table.
That's that point about the possible irreparable damage is that shit, at least for me, because a little bit of context, I've never been one who loved the marketing angle. I've always been like, I like the idea. And this is something that I believe in, so I'm going to work on it. I want to push it out. But when thinking about how these platforms handle that information of that content, knowing that it's always judging you on the latest thing that you've done. And I think that is something that can be lost on people. For a long time it was for me, because I think there's this perception when you see some account on a platform have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, listeners, you just automatically expect that it's almost a binary. That when they put the message out, that's how many people receive it, versus this is the potential reach of where it goes. And these are people who have, subscribed to you or whatever, but that does not mean that the visibility is going to be the same. And so I think that's why it's interesting that sometimes you'll see accounts, and I started noticing this, that maybe on YouTube 2-3 years ago, they were really in the pocket. And so they have millions of followers, but they put out a video, it's a week old and it doesn't even have 10, 15,000 views. And it's like, how would that even be possible? But if the subscribers never see it, because I think another thing is, if you're a subscriber, I just think about myself, how many people are we subscribed to on a platform like YouTube? Is it 5? Yeah, exactly. Is it 10? Is it 100? You lose count, right? And so YouTube, these algorithms have to figure out, how do we, as you said, keep people on these platforms? So what would you say nowadays, because for a while, I think a few years ago, it became really apparent that like short form was going to be the trend, and we saw TikTok really come and explode. But it can be a lot to keep up with, right? And I think between the platforms that generally exist, there's a difference in the importance of certain platforms within the context of Web3, crypto, NFTs. And from my vantage point, those two primary platforms are LinkedIn and Twitter, in terms of where the people are at. Now, YouTube is always going to be YouTube, but from your vantage point, what would you say, how have you had to maybe reassess the value and the prioritization of these platforms, thinking about your new audience of Web3, crypto, NFTs, et cetera, but then niching that down further to developers?
Yeah, exactly. So for us, we had this exact conversation because we're a startup, and it's everything in the startup is a priorities game, where we could do everything, right? We could be on Instagram, we could be on TikTok, we could be everywhere, but we physically don't have the time or resource. So we have to select what are the channels we're going to win, we're going to dominate, and then we can get to, the kind of second priorities later. And Twitter was the first place that we kind of decided that we were going to put our, stake in the ground, and we were going to dominate the Twitter space for kind of dev tooling. And that's, I think, specific and quite unique to Web3, that for whatever reason, Web3 has decided that Twitter is the kind of home. It's where the biggest influencers spend most of their time, and it's where a lot of the news breaks. And I think because of the real-time nature of it, because Web3 is an industry that moves so quickly, and it was really a space that kind of, I think, evolved from tech as an industry. And so tech people spend a lot of time on Twitter. So we really kind of put a lot of emphasis and a lot of investment into getting Twitter right. It's just where a lot of the kind of, I think, decision makers and the people who were going to amplify us were spending their time. So getting in front of the right people was important. And so we built an audience on Twitter pretty early. We then looked at LinkedIn, like you said. I think LinkedIn is an incredible opportunity, and one that is probably the most overlooked by, I think, people in Web3, probably because it has the tightest connotations with the, I guess, Web2 establishments and, but it's the place, I'd say, where you get the most reach for your investment. If LinkedIn is incredible at showing your post to an audience of people. And I think it's the one with the biggest disproportion of people who post and people who browse. I can't remember the exact stat, but it's something like a tiny percentage of people who browse on LinkedIn actually post, much lower than other social platforms, which is why you will see that you can get thousands of likes despite having, a tiny number of connections. But LinkedIn is a different type of person. So at Thirdweb, we have the developers we're trying to reach, but we're also trying to reach decision makers and businesses. And so that's like a different kind of content, but it's super valuable for us. We want somebody who is, a Nike marketing exec to see Thirdweb. And then when they think of dev tooling, they might not be the engineer themselves, but we're the people they'll turn to. So we were creating a different kind of content for LinkedIn. And we were also heavily gearing all of the content to our employee pages. So LinkedIn as a platform is really a people platform. It isn't somewhere where people interact with brands. And if you go on LinkedIn, you don't see any brands there, right? And I think, again, LinkedIn have said this. They've come out and admitted that we show something like 80% more of your audience will see it from a personal account than from a brand account. So again,
you're dropping all the gems, man.
Honestly, like there's a lot of this stuff is public, right? Like the platforms are kind of open about, how to game their algorithm, how to game their platforms, but it's also just going on them and seeing, like, you don't see brands post on there, but you see a guy who is, an executive at a company have 15,000 likes on a post about, a morning coffee. It's just like understanding how to create the content that's specific for that platform. And so, LinkedIn became a really good one for us, where, we're driving traffic to our site, and it's different kind of traffic, but still super valuable for us. YouTube again then is right now is our biggest focus, I'd say. And it was probably came after Twitter, maybe 3 or 4 months after we really got into a flow on Twitter, we decided to focus on YouTube. And that was by looking at our back end. We saw that YouTube was our biggest traffic driver from a social media platform. And that was before we posted any videos ourselves. So that was other people. Yeah, that was other people creating tutorials on how to use our tools to build Web3 applications. And you think about the intent of the user on YouTube. For developers especially, it's a place where you go to learn. So, the world's second biggest search engine, right? And so people will turn to YouTube at the same time they turn to Google. And so people were using these videos to teach themselves Web3 development. And so we decided, okay, we want to own a channel which has thousands of people learning Web3 development. And it will have our tools kind of integrated in a super organic way. And so YouTube is a slow burner. It's taken us like 6 months to get to 2,000 subscribers, but we're now posting 3 videos a week, and they're all kind of builds on how to use our tools. And you see when we post a video, if we post a video on a specific feature or a specific part of our platform, a lot of people will suddenly use that tooling, despite it only getting like 1,000 or 2,000 views. You think about the intent of that user. They're sat at their computer, they're building, they have the video on to the right, and they're using it to learn. That's way more valuable than something like a tweet, which also has a very short lifetime. So with YouTube, you get residual traffic for the next 12 months. And if you game the SEO, you could be seeing traffic on a video for the next 5-10 years, because you're the first video that pops up when they type in how to build XYZ. With something like Twitter, you can write a great thread and it will kind of lose any additional reach after 2 days. It's a very short lifetime. And so YouTube, you just get more kind of long tail traffic. And so, yeah, we are extremely, extremely bullish on YouTube. We're putting a lot of resource into getting it right, but it's definitely a slow burner because you don't see the results immediately.
Yeah, man. I think YouTube I don't want to use the word punishing, but it is not for the uncommitted. Because
yes, exactly.
To your point, there's not that immediate validation. And I don't remember the number, but it's like hundreds of thousands of hours of content are uploaded every minute to YouTube. And so just from the volume, and sure, not all of it is going to be, somebody talking about how to build out a dApp or something like that using, dev tooling, but still, that's just like the competition on the platform and how it has to prioritize. And especially in a period like this where we're not at all-time highs anymore. The negative sentiment is back, and so YouTube is factoring all these things in. I'm like, all right, these weirdos in the corner want to build these damn decentralized applications. All right, let's build up that audience profile versus if you're doing something like one of these challenges or trying to, fork what Mr. Beast does or MKBHD or some of these super prominent creators. But I definitely, in my experience, have noticed similarities also between LinkedIn. Like I've had a LinkedIn account for years, probably since high school, like the same one. Unlike Twitter, where I have I'm trying to get my old handle back because I lost the login and the password for it or something like that, the email I had, so I can change my names over. But the organic exposure you get on LinkedIn is mind-boggling. Just to your point, you can put something up and it doesn't matter what your vanity metrics are in terms of the ratio between your connections or your followers, any of that, but who will actually see it. And then I think the willingness of the people to engage with it, because I also think there's this psychological element of on certain platforms, I have this many followers, or I have built up my brand to such an extent. If I like or I share this, I'm endorsing it in an inexplicit way. And do I want to endorse that content necessarily? And what comes with that? Because people almost get in this position where they can be like the kingmakers, where, if the right person retweets you on Twitter, boom, you can get 50 followers, 100 followers, 1,000 followers because one person retweeted it. And so I think that, at least in my experience, it makes certain people hesitant to engage if, for instance, like this is something I'm struggling with. I don't even have 100 followers on Twitter yet. And so, I think there's also confusion. People see it like, is this a bot? Like, how the hell do they only have that many followers because it's Twitter? And so now people don't want to engage in it sometimes because it seems that way. But then you go over on LinkedIn and I got CEOs from companies I've never even heard of, extending connections to me just because the energy is different on the platform. So I'm curious, and we won't have to spend all this conversation, on like the tactical stuff, but I'm feeling like Tim Ferriss today. What would you say are some of your tips in terms of how you do differentiate the sort of content you do from a Twitter, from a YouTube, from a LinkedIn? And you gave us some gems about, share it from your personal page on LinkedIn. And obviously, with Twitter, it's shorter form, often more news related. But are there anything, other guiding principles that you kind of factor in when you're thinking about, in an ideal world, how you create a single piece of content and then get repeated use out of it so that you can maximize those resources that are going in to each piece of content?
Yeah. So I think, video has been a big focus for us because of our strategy on YouTube. We're exploring, it's super efficient YouTube because you shoot a 10-minute video, 15-minute video. We tested last week actually a 2-hour YouTube tutorial with one of our engineers, and it's our highest performing video like the last two months. And that's because the watch time on that video is crazy. So crazy high watch time. And as a result, YouTube are now showing it to, more people. So that's been an interesting one for us. We're now starting to explore like really long forms, so like 1 to 2 hour builds. But the reason that's interesting is because it's super efficient for the other channels. So we can then chop that video up and, host it on Twitter, host it on LinkedIn in some way. And it's been very, very, like, the big difference there is that, YouTube, again, you think about the mindset of the viewers, they're kind of there to settle in, they're there to watch for a long time. With platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, you're in this constant competition for attention. And, I think TikTok has driven this even more, this kind of instant gratification mindset when it comes to social media. And you really only have like 2 seconds to capture somebody's attention on a tweet, and that could be a video or just like a static post. And so whenever we post a video, whenever we post a tweet, we're just always thinking of it like, would I stop scrolling to watch this? Have I captured the attention of somebody? And to do that, you have to, sometimes be hyperbolic. You have to use language which is a little bit sensationalist. You'll see it on our Thirdweb Twitter. You can scroll through. There's a lot of hyperbole, but nothing that's dishonest. We just know that people aren't interested in your content. They don't give a fuck. So you have to. Sorry, I'm not sure if I meant to swear.
No, you're good. You are.
Okay, good. You have to, make people care, right? And so, we've always had a mindset whenever we create a piece of content, be it a post or a video, would I stop scrolling to look at this? And, that's you leading with a term or leading with a kind of huge statement. We also will sometimes, we know that driving comments and driving replies, again, is a really good and positive indicator for these social platforms. So platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter also, being opinionated is important. And it's difficult with a platform like us because we are a dev tool. We are, generally agnostic to a lot of the discussions and debates within Web3. But there are a few statements that we like to say that we believe in, and they're more kind of to the, the belief in Web3 as a future, or the belief in certain use cases as a interesting application of the technology. So being really forthcoming and forward with these statements is a great way to then get people disagreeing with you, which again is good for engagement, despite it being negative sentiment, or agreeing with you, or then like supporting it. And what we've learned as well is that people in Web3, they want to share something because they want to be seen to be helping their audience out in some way. So if a new like smart contract standard gets published and we do like a thread on it, we'll see a lot of engineers will share it to their audience because they want to be the kind of account who is servicing that kind of content for their followers, if that makes sense. So a lot of our content is, how do we really game that psychology behind why are people actually going to share this to their audience?
So it needs to be show stopping, right? It needs to grab their attention. And I've noticed that as well, that sometimes you have to be a little bit exaggerated so that somebody's like, what? And then there's the shock value of it. But then when they're like, oh, okay, to your point, that's not true, but maybe that's a little bit dialed up. And that also too, I've noticed on YouTube is a similar thing. How do you balance that shock value with discoverability and searchability? And like striking that balance can be difficult at times. And you might be familiar with, I think it's called Think Media on YouTube, and they teach people like Sean Kennel and the rest of his team, but they did a breakdown of some of the best performing channels and videos on YouTube. And they listed out the top 10 ways to title your video for these most successful channels. And they either had to do, I can't remember the exact order off the top of my head, but one of them was, time frames. So being able to get something done in a certain amount of time or in a certain window.
Nice.
A very strong opinion, contradicting a common thought, how something is done. And there were a few more on that list, but it was amazing to really look at it, because then when I started to notice the pattern on all of these successful channels, every single title began in one of those 10 fashions that they listed out. And so it was like, yo, if you're not using one of these formats, your video doesn't have a great shot. And so I think that all of these small pieces, you know, when you start to pull them together, really can get somebody in a better position where they can use these channels as an organic way to grow their business. Because like I stated at the opening, you can have the best tools in the world. So for instance, and I know they're not a direct competitor because they're not nearly as full-fledged, but somebody like Manifold, they do contracts specifically for NFTs, right? But most people, if I throw out the name Manifold, they don't know who the hell they are. They've never heard of them because they don't hit social nearly as hard. And so y'all have won that battle because you've recognized the importance of actually being there visibly. So if it's cool for us to transition a little bit, I want to learn more about your perspective. And this can be Web3, outside of Web3, but it's just about the whole storytelling component of when you roll out a business and the importance of how you do that, and just your philosophy around translating an idea that maybe a founder or an engineer had, and then getting that in such a way, in a form factor, that you can explain it to somebody in a way that compels them to go try that product or that offering out.
Yeah, storytelling has been a huge part of our strategy from day one. Even for our launch, you know, our launch strategy was very simple. We're going to create a video which A, announces us to the world, but B, explains what Web3 is in a very kind of simple, understandable, coherent way. And I think, you know, along with what I've spoken about earlier in terms of being obsessed with the way social platforms operate and the way content is received, being also really good at having your ear to the ground culturally in what are the stories in whatever industry, but I think Web3 is full of exciting and interesting stories and narratives that you can attach yourself to as a brand, right? So, you know, our launch was in December of last year, which was really when, you know, the kind of height of Web3 mania, you know, the real kind of, I think when the rest of the world was looking on going, you know, what is going on over there? And so we figured, you know, if we create a video which basically explains what Web 1 is, what Web 2 is, and what Web 3 is, and then announce our platform as this kind of solution for how to build for this new world, we knew that we would get incredible, you know, pickup and sharing organically from people who are interested in that story, and then we're kind of attached to the end. And so our launch video did, I think it was like 2.5 million views organically, so no paid views whatsoever, and it just kind of launched us in a way that we would not be able to have done in you know, through paid media or through working with creators. And so it was about like picking out a story, which was the kind of birth of Web3, and then telling it in a really compelling, again, creating a piece of video content which stood out visually, was very, very high production value, which was very important to us because it, you know, reflected our position as a brand of, you know, we really saw our opportunity in Web3 as how do we become the real kind of mature and you know, highbrow, and in a world of, you know, kind of scams and low quality projects, how do we make sure that we really are elevated? And I think that was, you know, with dev tooling especially, it's super important to gain that trust in that way. And we've done that on several occasions since then. So I think in January we launched another video which was it basically addressed Elon Musk's tweet, which was, "Has anybody seen Web3?" And the video opened with Elon Musk saying that Web3 is a fad and it's useless. And then, "Has anybody seen Web3?" This tweet that he made. And then we told the story of some of the real tangible use cases of Web3. So, you know, how creators were diversifying their income streams, how the music industry was being disrupted, how there were blockchain games that, you know, people were making considerable incomes and earnings from in you know, especially in countries that they don't have that level of income. And as a result, again, then attached ourselves to it. So how are we facilitating this revolution? And it's just every single step of our journey. We've created these storytelling pieces, the most recent being our launch, our raise video last week. Again, the narrative there was that, you know, the markets have crashed, but the demand for our tools is accelerating. So we're growing exponentially since the market's crashed. The story there is that builders are still building. And again, we attached ourselves to that kind of narrative. So I think it's just the opportunity there is that there are, you know, people like stories, and that's some of the greatest marketing you've ever seen is always going to be people telling great stories. And there's amazing stories in every single industry. And if you understand how to pick them out and how to organically attach yourselves to them, that's how you're going to reach more people than you ever will creating a piece of content that's just about your platform. And so, yeah, we've put an incredible amount of emphasis on it, and we will continue to do so.
See, what jumps out to me as you're really breaking all that down, because when someone like you explains it that way, it is so obvious, right? Like we live our whole lives and we attach narratives to everything. You know, somebody's driving down the road, somebody gets in front of you, instead of just the car merging over and maybe they didn't see you, or that just being the factual occurrence, oh, this person cut me off because they're an asshole. Like, that's a story. It's not the same sort of story, right? But it's a story that we are using to rationalize and to think through and add color to what is happening so that we get understanding, or we feel like there's some sort of catharsis when something goes some sort of way, or we have an explanation for it. And I think that as a whole, it can be companies can be so rushed or feel like they're rushed, where the idea is like, hey, we built this thing, now we got to go out and we monetize and we need to go get users. And so all along the way, it can get lost in like, hey, we have to remember that we are storytellers, because ultimately if you've built a product or a platform, your goal is to sell it. You have to get people to use it, even like a Uniswap. You don't pay directly to use a Uniswap, but they still had to figure out, similarly at DeFi Summer, what is the use case? Why would somebody need this? And at some point, even early on in a business's life cycle, you have to address, okay, what's the problem? How are we going to be the solution? That is a story in and of itself. But the part that is most interesting to me is that when we see times like we have experienced the last few months, where there's a bunch of rifts and people getting let go, often it's the marketing department. There's like even an adage in business that, you know, when layoffs happen, the marketing department is the first to go. And it's wild, because when marketing is done well, it can be the single differentiator between a company dominating the category and being the leader, the incumbent, and falling into obscurity. So what, as someone who's been doing what you've done for so long, do you have any rationale or any insight as to why you think most marketing teams are treated that way, and more explicitly, why most marketing teams are mediocre?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people, I think particularly in tech, and this is an industry I've really only been able to, been working in the last 18 months or so. So I'm still like, learning a lot of this, but there's definitely, I think at times, an attitude that if you build a great product, people will come, people will use it. And there isn't this appreciation of the need to get it in front of people. And I think that's because there's this kind of magic in the industry where you reach product market fit and your product will just take off. And I think there are instances where that happens. But in order to get to that point, or in order to get to it faster, it's really a numbers game. Like, it's one great piece of content can significantly change the trajectory of your product. And so you just need more shots at goal. And so, we also know that, that's one way of thinking about it. But I would also say that there's a lack of, I think especially in this kind of tech, right? So specifically for developer tools, I would say that there is a skepticism towards advertising and marketing. And I think particularly with technical customers, because they are technical and they actually understand how advertising works, they're not privy to it. And so, like, a good example is paid marketing. So paid marketing in Web3 is really interesting, where it actually doesn't really work. So, we've done at SocialChain, we were doing, advertising for big fast fashion businesses, right? And paid marketing was their biggest budget spend. They knew that when they put $100 in, they'd get $500 back. And so they just scaled that essentially. And that's how they grew their businesses, running ads on Facebook, running ads on Instagram. With Web3 and with tech and developer tools, they just do not respond to those kind of ads. They see a sponsored tag and they scroll past it because they are more technical and they understand that the dev tools and the tools they need to come from a place of trust. And trust isn't built through paid. It's built through, seeing it organically or having it referred to you. And so as a result, I think that people think that marketing is this, way of getting in front of developers in the wrong way, or, you're having to almost because you're doing marketing, you're almost making up for your product not being good enough in a weird way. You're compensating because it's not getting in front of them organically. But that's why the marketing has to be done differently. And I think our philosophy has been, we create content that will help you. We give value. We only give value. We will tell you what our product does, and we will show up in the places you show up. So, we will be on Twitter there to help you. We have our Discord has been our, one of our biggest focuses as well. It's not something I spoke about as a channel earlier, because I almost see it sitting outside of marketing in a way.
I feel like more like community and marketing are two different things.
They are, exactly, but Discord I see as bottom of the marketing funnel. So it's where we drive a lot of our, it's where we turn our users. Exactly. We turn them from, people who discover us to users, and then to evangelists through Discord. And so we have an incredible, customer service team on Discord. We have 30,000 people in our server that are building Web3 apps, are helping each other, are troubleshooting, fixing bugs. And that for me, that's, marketing in the places that the developers are. That's not, trying to put ourselves on a billboard that they might see. We're actually in the weeds with them, helping them build. And so that, I think, doesn't get the attention it deserves, because people bucket marketing under this, we need to, pay to reach people because our product isn't reaching them anyway, or it's not good enough to reach them anyway. And yeah, I think that's the way most marketing teams think. And there's also this definite lack of appreciation for the power of building an audience that you can reach the touch of a button. As I mentioned earlier, I just don't think it's really what people don't obsess over these channels and how to grow on them in a way that, like a creator does, in a way that YouTubers obsess over how to grow an audience. You can apply the same for a brand, and then it becomes really powerful to have them at your fingertips, essentially.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, what's cool is seeing these new companies that are starting up happening in this era, where it's already like definitive, hey, content marketing is a thing, and you should probably be paying attention to it. Whereas a lot of these stalwart incumbent companies, being enterprises, super crazy scale, where it takes forever and a day to get something done, there is this like, hey, we came up on paid marketing, paid advertising, and just a lot of those companies too have gotten to the point where really what they're trying to do is squeeze the last few basis points out of their existing user base. And so that willingness or that commitment to really give value is no longer there, because truth be told, now they exist to extract the value from their user base to give to the shareholders, which is an entirely different dynamic that I also think is very unique about this sector, where 99% of the companies in Web3 are not public. So they don't even have to think about the investor base in the same way. And as a general ethos of Web3, the investor base is the user base. The users are who are the ones investing in the product versus them being the shareholders. And I think that in and of itself is a mentality that when people like Thirdweb really truly believe and identify with it, makes it much more likely that they actually pour in and say, hey, on the front end, this might be an expense to build out our content strategy, to really get the production value there, to give this time, to have a team dedicated to it, and not just have it be something where it's a checklist of like, throw out a piece of content this week, but actually a deliberate strategy, as if, basically an internal content team that are trying to hit these metrics and scale and generate and get the real benefit out of these platforms, whether it be residual SEO, and then down the road the funny thing is, when you do it the right way, they become revenue streams in and of themselves that can make that particular unit in the organization self-funded. So
exactly,
it's I think there's just a big disconnect between people who've gotten into it and that understanding of really the value and the power of something like a YouTube or these other platforms, versus when people typically are on social media and they might be thinking or associating with direct-to-consumer brands that are just kind of throwing dollars in and just printing the money back out because they know that the algorithm will target and they can retarget and they can do all these things. But it is definitely different in this space. Yeah, man, I want to be mindful of your time. So keeping that in mind. Closing thoughts on, just from your perspective, takeaways that you've had being in this space thus far, and then your advice for somebody, whether they be a founder themselves or somebody who wants to go down the route of building brands, creating the narratives, and helping with go-to-market for companies in this space. What would you tell them? And then if you can let the people know where they can find you and where they can find Thirdweb.
Absolutely. I think Web3 is like an incredible opportunity for for so many people right now, for so many creatives as well. I think people who are working in other industries to really import their learnings into their space, because it is such a new technology. And the reason I love it so much is that the playbook is still being written right now. So nobody really knows what are the tactics that are going to work. And one thing that we've learned throughout the years, growing pages for brands and growing businesses in general, is you'll usually find that it's 2 to 3 tactics that really work for you. And so the great thing with Web3 is that we're now figuring out what those tactics are. So we think one of them is YouTube. We might be wrong, but we're pretty certain that's been a big focus for us. And that's an example, right? So, okay, that's like the playbook. We didn't know that. And so we figured that out. So there's this incredible learning opportunity that people have to come into an industry where the technology is barely a year, 2 years old, as a popular technology, at least, with a bunch of users. And so you have this incredible opportunity to be the people who write the playbook. And, the next 10, 20 years, you're the pioneers who really wrote the marketing, tactics that are going to live on forever. And I think that's just an incredibly exciting place to be. But I think that, I know a lot of people who want to come work in this space, and a lot of people who are starting out in this space. And there's also a disproportionate amount of investment of your time and energy that needs to go into being in the spaces and being a participant. So Web3 is not an industry you can learn. And I really believe that. And I believe people that come into the Thirdweb, and they'll ask me like, oh, do you have any videos I should watch? Or do you have any
get me up to speed,
podcasts? Yeah, like can you do like an hour session with me? And it's like you've got to download MetaMask, you've got to go mint an NFT, you've got to have your wallet hacked, you've got to go through all the, you've got to like really
round trip a few bags.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to be rugged. You're going to lose a few $1,000s. You need the battle scars to really understand why this is an interesting space and really form opinions of yourself of where the technology is going and why you think it's valuable and why you think it's interesting. And I think the biggest thing people should be focusing on now is I think that we've become a bit obsessed with this idea of Web3 being this very separate world to, Web 2 and technology. But I think the recent Starbucks announcement really kind of made me realize that, for those who don't have context, Starbucks is launching their loyalty program through Web3 on Polygon, on the Polygon blockchain. When you go on the Starbucks website, there's no mention of Web3, there's no mention of NFTs. It's just going to be a loyalty program, and blockchain technology will be powering the experience. And for me, it was like, this isn't going to be Web3. It will be just technology, and or it will be just the web. And this Web3 will be the thing that powers it, but people don't care. Jenny, who's buying her Starbucks in the morning, doesn't give a fuck that it's on Polygon. And so the obsession now needs to be away from this kind of cult-like obsession with the number goes up attitude towards Web3. It now needs to be, okay, what are the business cases? What is the technology that's going to be valuable? And how do I add value to those use cases? Because that's the real scalable, interesting stuff. I don't think it's, 1 million PFP projects dropping in the next year. I think we're past that now. And so, yeah, I think that there's going to have to be a mindset shift over the next 12 months or so. And people need to really kind of figure out, how am I bringing value to, what are the long-term genuine use cases, and how am I bringing value to them?
Love it. I couldn't agree more. So thank you again, Catty. This was an awesome time. I learned a ton here, and I know that everybody else listening will. If you could, please let the people know where they can find you, get in contact with you, and where they can find more out about Thirdweb.
Yeah, for sure. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Cathal UK, which is CATHAL UK. And you can follow Thirdweb on @Thirdweb_. We are working on the @Thirdweb handle, so hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll have secured that. But you can check out Thirdweb at @Thirdweb_.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again. This was awesome, and I look forward to the next one, man. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
All right. Talk to you, man.
You niggas ain't cheat me. You reenacted TV. I'm a real life shot caller. You niggas just shoot at the breeze. I can shoot at your knees. 1 cap, 2 cap, my cat. Go blind, producing near load of facts. Catch a skeleton around the map. See, I terrorize like it's Gitmo. Cause I theorize at higher tempo.